Good morning, everyone, and welcome to. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, you hear me? Yeah, we forgot the bell. Uh-oh, we don't have the bell. We don't have Henry's bell. No wonder. Well, normally at this time, I would be walking into my classroom, and I would I would say to my students, and some of them are here, so let's see the response. Good morning, class.
Good morning.
All right. Very good, very good. Yeah. Now, welcome to our 48th annual conference of the Canada-United States Law Institute. So if you'll notice, our 40th anniversary sign is now 8 years old, okay? So, anyway, I'd like to welcome everyone this morning. There'll be a brief introductory program from both presidents, our co-presidents of the Canada-United States Law Institute. I'm Steve Petrus. I'm the U.S. National Director. And I'd like to welcome everyone. And at this time, I want to recognize, before we start, the organizational structure of the Canada-United States Law Institute. We have two chairs. We have a U.S. chair, which is Jim Blanchard, sitting right here. And we have our Canadian co-chair, James Peterson. Jim, unfortunately, couldn't be here with us today. We do have two co-presidents. We're going to hear from them. We have our Canadian National Director, Kai Carmody. Kai, over there. Kai, later this afternoon, Kai will wrap up the conference for us. I'm the U.S. National Director. We have two managing directors, co-managing directors, Ted Perrin and Steve Paley. Steve will be here later. And we also have our executive committee, and several of those members are here today. And if I pronounce your name, please stand up. Diane Francis. And then Martha Hall Finley. James Graham, they could not be here. Larry Herman, right here. Peter McKay, Richard Newcomb. Is Rick here? He's here, but I don't see him right now. Chris Sands. And finally, Raul Rosado. Raul in the back over there. Thank you very much. And of course, we have to thank our sponsors who give us financial support and enable us to put on these conferences. Our gold sponsor is the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit. And we're going to hear from Colin Bird in a few moments. Our silver sponsors, a law firm of Blake Castles Graydon from Toronto, and Pile Dynamics and GRL Engineers. And we've got Adrian Rouse here for that. Our bronze sponsors are Baker & Hostetler, Barrett in America, Formica Corporation, Richard Newcomb, Richard W. Pogue, the government of Quebec and Chicago, and Taft Stettinius. Welcome to them. And finally, our community partners who help us promote this event. We have the Cleveland Council on World Affairs, the Council of the Great Lakes Region, the Greater Cleveland International Lawyers Group, the Northern Ohio District Export Council, Ohio Aerospace Institute, and the Wilson Center through its Canada Institute. Thank you very much to them. So, to kick us off, first I'll introduce to you our U.S. President, Dean Michael Scharf.
All right, good morning, everybody. So it was nice to see so many of you last night. I was very privileged to have been asked to do the keynote dinner speech, but even better, to be the after-dinner entertainment. And my band thanks you for being such an enthusiastic crowd last night. Steve mentioned that we have this banner celebrating our 40th that's 8 years old. We're getting ready to change that because our 50th anniversary is just 2 years away. So next year, we'll start in the ramp up for that with the 50th anniversary banner. Most of you heard last night that I am stepping down after 11 years of Dean of the Law School and as co-president of the Canada-U.S. Law Institute. And I have to say, being dean is fun, but being co-president of CUSLI is really where it's at. And that's because the people like Jim Blanchard and Steve and Kai and the members of the executive committee are the most amazing people to work with. And every year, we spend a year getting ready for this conference, figuring out what the topic is going to be, who the speaker should be, where the venue should be, what can we do to make this memorable. And so this year, I think you're in for a real treat. I can't wait for our luncheon speech that's coming up. Thank you for being here today. And this is just going to be another great conference. But the good news is I am not retiring. I am only repositioning. And I love this school and this program so much that I'm going back to being the Associate Dean for Global Legal Studies. And I was given a full year sabbatical, and I waived it because we have so much momentum going on right now. I didn't want to be out of the way. I've got a lot of other projects I'm excited about doing, and as a professor, I can't wait to have summers off and winter break off, which you don't get as a dean. But it's going to be a great future, and I'm going to still be part of it. And that's really what my message is this morning. I want to thank you all for being here and for all your support with the Canada-U.S. Law Institute. It's a really wonderful organization, and we're proud to host this conference. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, next we're going to hear virtually from our Canadian co-president, Erica Chamberlain, Dean of the Law Faculty of the University of Western Ontario. So hopefully we're going to zap her in right now. Hello, Erica.
Good morning. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yeah.
On behalf of the Canadian partner of CUSLI, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this annual conference. As you know, CUSLI is a longstanding partnership between our universities, and I'm delighted that it continues to thrive. I'm thankful for this virtual hybrid format that has made the conference more accessible to the audience here in Canada and across the continent. For those of you not familiar with the University of Western Ontario Faculty of Law, or Western Law as we like to call it, we're located in London, Ontario, which is 1 or 2 hours from the border, depending on which bridge you happen to cross. Western Law has a strong and growing group of international law researchers, including experts on trade and conflict of laws, as well as a strong international law internship program that allows our students to get first-class experiences in offices of the United Nations, the WTO, the World Bank, and a range of international organizations. Western Law also hosts Canada-U.S. Law Institute's annual Distinguished Lecture, which features leading diplomats, academics, or journalists speaking on topics related to Canada-U.S. relations. And we host several events geared to students, which compare Canadian and American approaches to issues like border security, the regulation of cannabis, and sanctions. This year, we also hosted a fireside chat with the Honorable François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Canada. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the members of CUSLI's Executive Committee for their ongoing leadership and for helping to assemble the fantastic lineup of speakers we have for you today. I'm glad that you've joined us for this conference on the economics of human rights, which I know is top of mind for many across our two nations. Got some outstanding speakers presenting, and I think you're in for some stimulating discussion. So I'll turn it back over to Steve Petrus to continue with the program.
Thank you, Erica. Let's give Erica a round of applause, too. I was just handed the bell, the Henry King bell. So now the conference is officially opened, okay? So our first speaker this morning is Colin Bird, the Consul General of Canada in Detroit. Consul General Bird has been from the start of serving in this position an engaged attendee at our conferences and a regular speaker. He brings with him deep knowledge of Canada-U.S. relations that started with his education. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from Carleton University and a master's degree in international affairs.
You got the wrong bio there.
No? I got the wrong bio, okay.
Not to, I love Carleton, but...
No, that was okay. What's the correct one?
So I was at
I have.
My law degree at University of Law.
That's right. Okay. Geez, how?
But I
I wonder
think
how-
if that's from what was on the website,
Yeah.
unfortunately you've got the wrong bio.
The wrong bio.
You've got a good colleague of mine.
So where's the real Colin Bird? Okay. All right. Okay, good. You got the real bio. All right. Well, I think your involvement, though, has been in international trade for the government of Canada. You have led the government of Canada in various trade negotiations and international agreements, and you've brought that wealth of experience to us here at the Canada-United States Law Institute. And you've been in your present position since 2019, and you're responsible for the trade and investment between Canada and the United States, and your area of expertise and your area of jurisdiction covers Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. So, Colin, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, and for our co-presidents. And thank you to the entire Koosley team, frankly, for choosing the theme of today's conference. Because, before I came into government after law school in 2004, I had spent the previous almost 20 years as a human rights advocate. And then I became a trade official for the government of Canada. And there's always a challenge reconciling someone who believes passionately in breaking down barriers for commerce and for markets, and those in the human rights community. And so I always felt that tension in the reality of my life. It was only 8 years ago that the G7 leaders recognized that explicit connection between recognizing international human rights norms and economic prosperity. But things have really changed in the last little while. So maybe just to back up a little bit on sort of my story, because I want to share today not so much just as an overview of what Canada is doing on that intersection between human rights and economics. But I want to talk about it as a practitioner, because that has really been very much the story of my experience over the last 10 years in government. So I went down to lead our trade policy team at the embassy in Washington back in 2014. And frankly, we had started to lose the narrative on the value of free trade, the value of open markets, of reducing barriers. It was seen as a race to the bottom. We were talking about, it was the 25th anniversary of when we had first signed the Canada-US FTA, which was a huge deal for this organization. But no one in Washington wanted to talk about NAFTA. And so there had to be a fundamental reset. A real reconsideration of where we were operating both in the human rights community and in the global free trade community. And you saw that happen when we renegotiated the NAFTA. You really saw a focus on how can we lift all boats, how can we make the case to our citizens that trade is a good net positive for them to bring prosperity. And we came up with some really innovative tools through that process. And I just wanted to sort of recognize, the rapid response mechanism that is now included now in the new USMCA, or CUSMA as we call it in Canada. That is a tool that is new, it's innovative, it allows us to target facilities instead of pitting one country against the other in this search for bringing prosperity to everyone. And it wouldn't have been possible, frankly, and I think we should give a shout out, since we are in the state of Ohio and in the city of Cleveland, to Senator Brown and his team, because they played a big role in making that mechanism happen. It's something that the U.S. has been using to extraordinary effect since the USMCA came into effect in 2020. There's now been 22 different reviews under the U.S. system, and one under the Canadian system, where we've accepted a case and actually had a resolution of it. Lots of reasons why that's a disparity between who's using it at this point, but there's a lot of good rational reasons why this would be primarily a U.S.-Mexico tool at this point. But it's had the effect of really improving the life for 30,000 Mexican workers. It's had the effect of bringing back pay to individuals. It's had the effect of actually having us be cooperative between Canada and the United States, Canada and Mexico and the United States, in trying to resolve these issues that can really do damage to these very important institutions that make it possible for us to work together. But that wasn't the only piece where that renegotiation really tied the story of human rights and free trade together. We also, as a result of those negotiations, ended up on July 1st, 2020, with Canada becoming the second country in the world after the United States in having an import prohibition for products made with forced labor, in whole or in part. And that in part, as any lawyer in the room will know, is really what makes that such a sweeping and powerful tool to help us address human rights issues in how our trade is conducted. So if you looked at that and you thought, that's a pretty good set of innovative tools that we've had, and if it stopped there, that would be pretty effective. But what we have done with that, and that sort of goes on to my own personal story of after leaving the embassy. Sorry, Henry. After leaving the embassy in 2019, I took on the role of Canada's senior trade official at the G7 and the G20 and the other multilateral institutions. And so when we had the UK presidency for the G7, this was just after Canada had come on board with the import prohibition on forced labor. We were able to bring the case to the UK as chair of the G7, that this was an issue that would now unite, that could really unite the G7. And I'm really proud that during my watch as senior trade official for Canada at the G7, we had the first ever standalone statement by G7 trade ministers on forced labor and how we were going to cooperate on that. And you can really see the impacts of that across the board, whether it's the new German law on due diligence, the new guidance coming out of the Japanese government to their industry about how to make sure that there is due diligence in their supply chains. It also comes through in Canada's adoption in just coming into force this past January of our supply chain due diligence legislation. So between bringing the story of what we were doing in NAFTA to the G7 and bringing the opportunity to cooperate. And there's a very important line in that statement out of the G7 on forced labor, which is that we're going to be sharing best practices and cooperating on evidence. And for those in the room who are 3Ls or coming from the law school, this is a really challenging area, frankly, because that's how the U.S. has been at this game of importing the prohibition of goods with forced labor since, I think, 1919. They have a lot of ability to bring in evidence. Canada, with our law, we're now in the game since 2020. But the ability to find the evidence on forced labor is taking a build-up time. But out of that process at the G7, you had, for example, the risking team at Customs and Border Protection in the United States getting embedded with our team up at CBSA, Canada Border Services Agency, last summer in Canada. You have monthly calls between our agencies to try to sort of pass on that knowledge and that capacity that the U.S. has on that import prohibition and take it to Canada. Similarly, I think we are now at this stage with our new forced labor due diligence legislation, where the first reporting out from companies is going to be taking place at the end of May. That's going to be a really powerful tool for companies, for civil society, for governments to understand the ecosystem of Canadian companies in the world working on the issue of forced labor. And I think will really up the game. And so that's learning and an approach that we're taking that can really transfer here in the United States. And so, I'm really proud at this point that Canada is the only country in the world that has now done both of these kinds of approaches to forced labor. And you can really trace that back to some of those conversations on the development of the new NAFTA. Sure, there was also a lot of realization of what was going on in Xinjiang, and that spurred momentum here. But it does sort of make the case that I think Koosley makes, that the Canada-U.S. connection and working together on shared values can really move the needle not only for ourselves, but for the world as a whole. And Michael, I wanted to sort of call you out not only for raising the bar on entertainment value for our event last night, but for your rant on Russia. I was in the role of senior trade official for the G7 in February 2022 when the Russian invasion occurred. And frankly, it was one of those moments of incredible pride in what we have accomplished together and what we are capable of when facing some really extreme circumstances. It was almost a challenge amongst G7 members, but particularly between Canada and the United States, and I'd also have to add Japan into that mix, to figure out how we could take some of these economic tools that we have and try to apply them to resolve the challenge of the Russian invasion. And so whether you're talking asset forfeiture or, I was very proud that Canada was the first ones to actually withdraw most favored nation trading status from Russia after that invasion. All of our colleagues were amazed that we could do it so fast, but it became almost this competition to see who could pass the innovative collection of measures on the economic side to try to have an influence on what was going on in Europe. I recognize we are on a university campus, and the wars in the Middle East, the war in Europe, these can be war in Africa, what's going on in our own hemisphere in terms of the crisis in Haiti right now. These are extraordinarily challenging times for human rights. But we don't have to only look at the grim side of the equation at this point, because we do have these new types of tools that are coming up, like the rapid response mechanism, like the innovative things that we have started to pull out, whether it's keeping Russia out of the International Exchange system amongst banks, that are showing that we are still dynamic. And one of the other things I wanted to shout out to you, Michael, for on your speech last night was how you brought in Henry King and Sidney Vicker, and that history that is not only the history of this university, but also the history of this institute, and ties us to that broader tradition of human rights advocacy at the United Nations. And so while I'm really wanting to sort of focus this morning on thinking about some of these new and innovative tools that we are developing to address human rights and on the economic side, that does not mean by any stretch that we are moving away from our commitment and engagement with the human rights apparatus that Canada and the United States were so seminal in creating after the Second World War. You'll have seen last year our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Joly, announced that Canada was putting itself forward as a candidate to be on the UN Human Rights Council. If you looked at the budget that came out this week in Ottawa, you will see a very significant reinvestment in our mission to the United Nations. So there is a need to sort of double down in recognizing the value of the institutions and the system that came out of the Second World War. But it's also an opportunity that we have now to really look at new tools, find ways to engage folks in this human rights effort through some of these economic tools that we're going to be using going forward. So, I think, Wayne, I wanted to just recognize, Koosley chose very well for the Picker Award. I've seen the work that you've done around IPECTA, the Indigenous People's Education Collaboration on Trade and Arrangement. That is another new tool that's trying to engage folks around the world in recognizing Indigenous engagement and the opportunity of trade and the opportunity of development to really address human rights issues as well. And that sort of brings me to my current job. So, I was posted into the Midwest in 2022, and it was a lot of it was wanting to see how the engagement that we had done with the new NAFTA was working in practice. And a lot of my job here is supporting the energy transition, supporting the transition in our manufacturing heartland between the United States and Canada towards being essentially the green manufacturing powerhouse for the world. And in doing that, one of the issues we're going to be talking about later today on the panel is the role of Indigenous communities as we try to bring those supply chains into North America for critical minerals, as we try to sort of be able to have the supply chains here in North America to support that energy transition, the new developments. That's going to involve engagement on a completely different level with First Nation communities in Canada and Native American communities here in the United States. And, looking at that from my seat now, as we're looking about how can we speed up permitting, how can we speed up all the bureaucratic process that's required in order to meet some of the targets that we have set ourselves. Some of the success stories that I'm seeing in Canada, whether you're talking the transmission line down from Quebec to New York City to give New York City 20% of its power carbon free, that's involving an equity stake by First Nation communities. Those are the stories that we need to be starting to tell each other and share about how we can do this so that it's faster, but it's also engaging the communities that are going to be impacted by the kind of development that we're going to be doing. So it's a tremendously rich program that we are looking at this afternoon. Whether you're looking at the Indigenous angle on that panel, whether you're looking at the structures and what we need to develop in terms of human rights tools going forward. On climate, this is the reason why we are doing as much engagement as government in the economy, which is pretty unusual. And as a free trader guy, I don't tend to look at that as the way to go usually. But when you're confronting a massive threat, as we are with climate change, new tools are required. And so I look forward to hearing from our panels this afternoon. I do hope we have time to have some conversations about how I sort of have seen this progression from the different seats that I've taken, whether it's in Washington or whether it's in the multilateral forum or whether it's back here in the Midwest. But with that, thank you. Thank you to Coosly for putting on this event, and happy to engage in any dialogue that you'd like to have.
Thank you, Colin. We do have time for a question or two for Colin, if anybody has any questions. But we also have, by the way, a special recognition and tribute for Colin from our own Jim Blanchard, former governor of Michigan, former U.S. ambassador to Canada, who'd like to say a few words not only about the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit, but also another institution in his home state. So Jim, come on up.
Thank you, Steve. Actually, I thought I was selected to introduce him initially, but that didn't work out. So I give you Colin Bird. No. You know, the consulate in Detroit has been so instrumental in helping us at Coosly here. And of course, you're in a long line of distinguished consuls general, but he's rather modest. How many consuls general does Canada have in the U.S.? 12?
13 if you count our
13.
guy in the embassy in Washington who does the Mid-Atlantic.
13, yeah. What you need to know, though, is the one in Detroit is the most important. It is. And he's next to the ambassador to the United States. Colin is the most influential Canadian official in this country, and that's really important. The Detroit, Windsor, Ontario, Michigan, Great Lakes connection really is critical, as you heard. They represent both Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. And it's where everything really is happening, whether it's immigration or energy or manufacturing or trade or the Gordie Howe Bridge. We talked about that last night, though. And Colin is the commander-in-chief of all that activity. He's the one that the governor of Michigan looks to and the U.S. ambassador to Canada looks to, as well as Canada's ambassador here. So I want to thank you especially for your role. And also, you're on the advisory board at Michigan State's Canadian Studies Center. Thank you very much, Colin. You are a wonderful leader that really helps us all. Thank you. Thank you. A couple other acknowledgments here. The new director of the Canadian Studies Center at Michigan State University is with us today, Rebecca Mallowan. Please stand up, Rebecca. This is the longest running Canadian Studies Center in any American college or university. Is it 65 years? Is that what we're celebrating? And I know we commemorate that in the fall with the CN Forum on September 27th? Yes. Anybody that wants to go to that, it'll be in East Lansing. You are more than welcome to sign up for that. But I wanted to mention that. I also want to thank Chris Sands because we have this partnership with the Canada Institute at Woodrow Wilson Center, and that's a really valuable partnership. And you and your staff have been very helpful, particularly in our fall program. But I want to acknowledge that because we don't want to take these relationships for granted. One other introduction I want to mention, and that is Winona Single. Winona, would you raise your hand? Winona Single is the director of the Indigenous Law and Policy Center at Michigan State University. Happens to be my alma mater. Who knew, right? Anyway, and she's also a professor of law. She's had an incredible career, starting with the first in her family to go to college. She ends up at Harvard and Harvard Law School. But she's taught English in Prague. She's an expert on indigenous law and policy in the U.S. and, of course, is with us today to be part of a panel. But I'm really pleased. She's also worked with Governor Whitmer as a legal advisor in Michigan and was a proud appointee by President Obama to the advisory commission for the St. Lawrence Seaway. But I want to give you a special welcome because of my alma mater and the fact that this conference it's just right up your alley. And so we're glad you're here. And I also want to thank the students who are here. These conferences are good, but we have to transmit knowledge to those who are going to be managing things in the future. And by the way, and thank you, Dean, for your service. When I was a kid, there was a TV sitcom called The Flying Nun. Now there could be one, The Singing Dean. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks for listening.